Hi, everybody. I'm Connecticut State Archaeologist Sarah Sportman. Welcome to the October episode of the Archaeology of Connecticut. Scott and Glenda are on vacation tonight, so I'm joined by some of my colleagues from the State Historic Preservation Office and Preservation Connecticut to talk about archaeology at the state level. October is Archaeology Month here in Connecticut, and we thought it would be a great time to bring back Kathy Labadia, the staff archaeologist at the State Historic Preservation Office, who's been on the show a couple of times before, and to introduce you to two of our newest members of the Connecticut archaeological community, Cory, Atkinson, and Stefon Danczuk. Here in Connecticut, we've got 3 offices and organizations that work together to facilitate both the preservation of our state's archaeological resources and the archaeological resource that generates the content, like exhibits, public talks, and publications that bring the past alive and bring the stories to everybody in the public. So the Office of State Archaeology is one branch, the State Historic Preservation Office is another, and Preservation Connecticut is the third. In the last 2 years, we've been fortunate to add these 2 new staff members, Cory at SHPO and Stefon at Preservation CT, effectively doubling the size of our team, and we're very excited to have them here tonight to talk about what they do and how we all work together to facilitate archaeology in the state. So, as I said, Kathy, you've been on the show several times before, but can you give us just a little introduction?
Sure. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Kathy Labadia. I am a Connecticut native. I grew up in Connecticut. I went to Central Connecticut, where I started studying anthropology and archaeology. And, you know, of course, why? So I'll be honest with you. I was a child of Indiana Jones. You know, I saw it when I was in middle school. I insisted that my bus driver call me Indy. I used to refer to each bus as an adventure and what were we going to find, and it was usually our middle school. And when I entered high school, I actually decided, okay, you know, this is what I'm doing. Everybody in my family knew this is what she's going to do. And I don't think they took it seriously. I just think they thought it was a phase I was going through. When I was in high school, though, I had a period of time during the winter semesters we could do something, you know, as an internship. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to do archaeology. Of course, the only places doing archaeology in the middle of the winter are in the southern hemisphere. So I ended up going to New Zealand. And, you know, as a young student, thinking this is what I'm going to do with my life, I was really disappointed. We had to walk a half mile into the site through this sticky grass. So by the time you would get there, all the dirt would stick all over you. And it was hot and miserable. And I was actually devastated my first few days. And I thought, wow, you know, my whole life is built up to this, and here I am, and this is awful. And then you find your first artifact. And you hold it, and you realize the story behind it, and you're pulled in. And so I came back, continued my education archaeology. I left the region for a while, moved back to Connecticut after having a family, and have what I think is the best job in archaeology in the state at the State Historic Preservation Office. So I'm very lucky.
Do you get that a lot, Sarah, the Indy Jones thing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, that's everybody's go-to archaeologist.
I think for a certain generation. Yeah, I hate to admit it. Sorry.
Well, that's true. Although I heard the next movie's coming out soon, and we'll bring in.
My son has already told me we are not going to go do that.
Aged and decrepit Indiana Jones for the new generation.
Well, let's keep going around the roundtable here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stefon Danczuk. I'm with Preservation Connecticut. I'm their new archaeology circuit writer. I got my undergrad degree actually in history from UConn. Archaeology is not something I knew I was going to do growing up. I was enthralled with Jurassic Park. I was like, I'm going to go into paleontology. And then that faded. And then I was like, I'm going to go into business. That faded. Then I was like, I'm going to do computer science. That was really, really hard. And I didn't get into the UConn School of Engineering. So I was like, I'm good at history. Let's do that. And through that, you had to take related courses towards your major. And anthropology was one of them. So I started with Intro to Archaeology. Then from there, it was lithic analysis. From there, the Professor Dan Adler was like, hey, I'm doing a field school in Armenia. And I was like, what? And he's like, you know the basics, come. And I was like, okay. So that summer I went to Armenia, and right by between Georgia, Turkey, I don't know all the other countries, Kazakhstan or one of the stands, I think.
One of the stands.
Yeah. Look, I'm
Not geography.
Yeah, not geography. Somehow archaeology and history. I don't know. I'm no expert, but when I find something that I'm passionate about, I dive in. And when similar to Kathy, not as grueling, we took a van, a local Armenian drove us to the site. It was right by a decommissioned military base that they had discovered the site. It was in a river gorge that they had demoed part of it to make a road for the military base. And when they demoed it, all these obsidian artifacts, because over in Armenia, there's a lot of volcanoes, and the go-to lithic material is obsidian. So lucky us, we get the coolest artifacts to look at. So my first archaeological dig was with some of the coolest artifacts with the best material, and I was like, this is amazing. Gonna finish that history degree, and then kind of wandered my way, ended up meeting a friend who was like, hey, I work for this cultural resource management firm. You did a field school. Why don't you come dig with us? I was like, all right, that sounds cool. And rediscovered that passion. And now it's just been, it was traveling all over the Northeast, doing all these survey digs and stuff like that. And similar to, like Kathy said, when you find those artifacts out in the middle of nowhere, you're on a Eversource power line, you think, who would ever come here? This is a godforsaken place. It's only good for utilities. Well, thousands of years ago, someone walked by, dropped a lithic tool, and now I'm holding it in my hand. And that's pretty cool.
Fantastic. And rounding out the roundtable.
Hi, I'm Cory Atkinson, and I'm the most recent addition to the State Historic Preservation Office as the second staff archaeologist. I've been there since about July, and like Kathy, I found my interest in archaeology pretty early on in middle school, but not as cool. I didn't fall in love with the field because of Indiana Jones. I had made an Egyptology diorama.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
that project kind of opened the door for me. I was always kind of interested in history, and that kind of it kept going through high school and into college. I went to did my undergraduate education up in New Hampshire, and it was at that point I kind of fell in love with New England archaeology because it was my own backyard, and I'm from Connecticut as well, so to end up working in the state has been a dream come true. So I went out of state a little bit to finish off my education in New York, but still kind of stayed relatively local and found my love of learning about the history in my own backyard. So not as cool as Kathy, but I gotta say, those diorama projects can really lead you down a path.
And Sarah, how does this team fit into your everyday, into your planning, into your execution of your curriculum, of what you want to get done on an annual basis?
Well, that's sort of the thing. So we all have different roles in the state, the way the state deals with archaeology, but they're really important to integrate those together to facilitate both preservation as well as archaeological research. So I think it would probably be useful. I mean, we've talked a lot about the Office of State Archaeology and what we do here on the program before, but I think it would be really useful to talk a little bit about what SHPO does and what Preservation Connecticut does and kind of how they fit in and how we all work together. So, I don't know. Kathy, you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So the State Historic Preservation Office was actually created through a federal mandate. It's the National Historic Preservation Act. So every state has this office, and every state, if you receive federal money, you are required to have a position of a staff archaeologist. So there's one of at least me in every state across the country and our territories. And there's a bunch of prescribed responsibilities we have through that federal mandate in terms of surveying land, identifying sites, keeping an inventory of these sites. But perhaps the biggest function that we serve is what we call a regulatory oversight. So every time there is a road, a bridge, a utility corridor, or a cell tower that goes up, it goes through our office for a project review. And it is through that project review, while a lot of us still think of archaeology in this very romanticized academic pursuit, the vast majority of archaeology that happens every day in this country actually comes through the State Historic Preservation Office through these regulatory mandates.
Yeah, and that's I think a really important point, because one of the most common questions that I get, just out in the field dealing with the public when people see an archaeological dig happening is they're like, how do you know to dig here? And, sometimes it's an academic thing. Sometimes people have done research and realize that this is a good location for a site, or there's historic documentation of a site. But 9 times out of 10, literally 9 times out of 10, they're digging there because that's where some kind of development project is happening. And the idea behind all of the regulation is really to, preserve, protect, to manage the resources that might be destroyed by development, and yet still allow that development to happen.
Yeah, we're actually, so archaeological sites are protected through a couple different laws. So we mostly work through this thing called Section 106, but we also do a lot of work through the National Environmental Policy Act. And I always like that as a good descriptor for people, because people understand the importance of clean water, clean air, protecting threatened and endangered species. And archaeological sites are protected just like those natural resources, and they're put in public trust. And so I really think when we look around the table and we see how much the state has invested in professional archaeologists working for the state and working with the state, it really says something about archaeology being in the public trust and worthy of the same preservation as those other things.
So isn't there some sort of if a area is get developed, don't you have to approve the actual development of the area, or do some sort of a survey that says, hey, it's okay? I'm thinking of I forget the name of it, and I'm reaching out. The Elmcrest situation in Portland, for instance, which was had great goals and a lot of good attached to it, and no reason why you wouldn't want to roll up your sleeves, except for there's a lot of history attached to it too. Is there a process for where that gets filed, even though they don't know that there's anything rich, layers and layers and layers underneath? It gets filed, somehow it gets on your desk, and you have to at least review it in order for that to proceed?
Yes and no. So it just depends upon whether the project has a trigger for our review. And that trigger would be either that there's federal or state funding, permitting, authorizations, or other types of approvals, which I know sounds incredibly bureaucratic, but there are certain reasons why a project would come to our office. And we do both above the ground, so historic buildings, as well as below the ground. And I'm always jealous of our above ground counterparts, because archaeology is hard to argue for when you can't see it. And so, when you talk about those layers underneath, those are the things people don't see. And so, being able to work with Sarah's office, work with Preservation Connecticut is so important, because we need people to be able to see those things, even though you literally cannot see those things. And because I can't hold somebody responsible for doing harm to an archaeological site if they didn't know it was there.
Okay, so the last thing we want to do is get into, sensational kind of issues or topics. But it'd be great if you could give us an example of something that a lot of people thought it was unnecessary for you to get involved, that you did get involved, and holy moly, look at the treasure trove we found.
They are sites that you have talked about on your show. So when you talk about the Brian Jones site, the Paleo-Indian site in Avon, there is no way that site would have been discovered if not for the DOT building a bridge. And when that bridge was being built, the construction schedule was really important. Brian had worked on that site when he was in the cultural resource management firm doing the work there. And he said, I think there's these paleo deposits. And based on just that hunch, no verification, just that hunch, we requested the DOT to do a staged construction that allowed archaeologists to go in as the bridge was being built to make sure. And I'm going to tell you, there are a few times I feel like in my job I've had to go to the mat to fight for something. That was one of the times I went to the mat to fight for something, and luckily we found one of the most amazing sites in Connecticut.
Well, can you put a number on it? Is it a top 5 site in all of Connecticut? Is it a top 10 for sure?
Oh, no question. I mean, it's the top 5 site in all of New England.
Wow. All right, I don't want to push the envelope, but how about give me one more example?
Definitely. I'll pick another one that's near and dear to Sarah's heart, which is, and so the DOT was a big federal project, and sometimes the feds feel more responsibility towards the law. When you're dealing with the state, you have to do a little bit more cajoling. And there was a project at the Webdean Stevens property where they wanted to build an addition, and I requested some archaeology, and I am not going to lie to you. If I thought Avon was a fight, yeah, this one went more than 9 rounds. I mean, it was a lot of back and forth. And so in that project, they uncovered the palisade that was associated with the first European settlement.
So this is how, I mean, you phoned in, I think. We talked to you during this dig, I think.
Yeah, because I worked on that project when I was in CRM.
LRB, I think, was there.
Yeah. Oh, she did. She came out and interviewed. Yeah.
Yeah, she found a liquor bottle. Of course, LRB. Well done.
But that's another project that without the laws in place, Webdean Stevens would not have invested money in archaeology. And now what's great about it is they have taken it to heart. They love this piece of their history. They're not just a colonial museum anymore. They're now about European settlement, early contact.
Yeah. I mean, that's a significant, I don't want to put a top 5, a top 10, but it forced a significant cultural asset in the Northeast to rethink our towns and villages, our original settlements. Yes. Correct?
You are correct.
Yeah, and I think it also brought to mind to people more of an idea going forward that these types of sites actually can exist in areas that are settled. You know what I mean? That there are pockets of this early history, Native American as well as early colonial history, just buried beneath some of the older parts of our towns. And, that's a thing that we desperately needed to keep in mind as development projects move forward in those areas.
Yes, I think when you talk about visibility, nobody would have anticipated in either Avon or Wethersfield, just looking at the ground, what was below it.
I'm getting this just in. I'm getting corrected. It was medicine, and then I'm called a nasty word. So we don't do that on radio, LRB. Hey, I'm not going to push for anything more, but there are a lot more, right?
Yes.
And with each one, is it easier, or does it continue to be? It's still a process. And I mean, because it would sound to me like, hey, man, don't argue with me. Look at this, look at this, look at this. It would get easier. But my guess is also when the market is involved, when business is involved, it's not going to get easier.
There's a lot of factors. For me, I think the single most important thing is building of relationships. So when people start to trust you, and I think if you asked any person, they don't see me as a capricious or arbitrary, project reviewer. I give it to it very straight, and I go after the things that I think are important. I think it develops a comfort level in dealing with you, trusting your opinion, and, encouraging people to just do the right thing.
Yeah. How do you guys get involved? At what point? Where does the story go from here?
Well, I'm within SHPO. I am within the same role as Kathy, so I review projects as well. And to her point, it's not always about the top 10 most important sites and finding the top 10 most important sites in the state, for example. Even the little sites, every little bit counts in terms of helping people understand what we exactly have in the within the archaeological record in the state, and every little bit provides that much more visibility to archaeology and helps, to your point, helps future projects go that much more smoothly. And I think one of the benefits of having done archaeology under this regulatory framework for so long is that some of the larger developers have this understanding now of the process, and they are now taking it upon themselves to facilitate these projects to make them go smoother, so they're not trying to fit in this archaeology at the last second, and it's now built into their processes as well.
All right, so I'm going to go there. I mean, we've known each other for 30 minutes here. So let's do a little question of saying, okay, not in the top 10, not even in the top 50. Give me an example of something small that's actually extremely meaningful.
Well, for example, even today, we had a site that came in from a development project that's just a small little lot that's being developed, and it's not, it probably wouldn't even make the top 100 sites. However, it's still important because it still shows us that people were living at this location in the past within thousands of years ago. So to that local community, it may not make the front cover of Archaeology magazine, but it shows that community that people were there thousands of years in the past, and not just within the built historic environment that they see every day.
And that helps you, Sarah, kind of take a more macro look at our state in terms of how communities may have moved, how the seasons were affected, because everything is kind of connected, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, one of the important things, like one of the things that I do to kind of start every public presentation is to talk about archaeology in the state. Like, as a rule, we do not release the locations of archaeological sites to protect them, but we have sort of a general map of the state with these big dots that kind of mark, the thousands and thousands of sites across the state. And it's nice to just put that up as a visual to let people know, hey, people have lived on this landscape for over 12,000 years. They were everywhere. They lived in your town, archaeology is everywhere. And I think, one, it speaks to the long native presence on the landscape, which is really important, I think, to maintain everybody's kind of understanding of that, and to make it more visible. But two, just to make people understand that, it's not a strange, amazing one-off experience to find an archaeological site. And I think lots of times people think that it is kind of a rare thing because you only hear about the big, exciting ones.
Well, and even the little ones, they help our knowledge base. They establish the context so that we can interpret the big sites. They establish our understanding of how the landscape was used, how to interpret it now, so that we can make good recommendations.
How do you get involved?
Well, I work for Preservation Connecticut. We used to be known as the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation, but did some rebranding a few years ago. We're actually a nonprofit that works with the state. We were formed back in 1977, I want to say, late 70s, in trying to assist the state in outreach and facilitating funding. We used to do mostly just historic structures and stuff like that. But this year I was brought on to be the first archaeologist, preservationist with the organization. So Preservation Connecticut, we have a program called the Circuit Riders, where you call into our office, you email us, just make a little post on our website, and you go, hey, I have this historic home. I have this historic site. I have this old well in my backyard. Can you come check it out? Can you tell me more about it? I'm interested. Or like with historic structures, they're like, hey, I've got this old home. I have heard that there are some tax credits out there. There are some funding sources. Can you guys come and help me out with that? Do you have best practices? Do you have contractors that can do this kind of work? And that's where preservation comes in. Myself and my coworkers will go out on site, talk to the folks, be like, oh, you've got this really nice, colonial salt box. We have this contractor that can give you a really good estimate for a good, new roof. Also, we see that you've got these issues. We kind of know, my coworkers know better than me because I'm more of the underground stuff, but, we're able to identify issues with a structure that can help save it and preserve it and keep it around. So the idea was that we had gotten a few calls about archaeology, whether those were, old cellars, ruins, or very rarely native artifacts, but it still comes up sometimes. And the idea was that, bring in someone that's understands that field better. So that's kind of my job, is that when, the average person's got a question, I go out and try to answer it as best I can.
So don't want to know street address or anything. Don't even want to know the town, but how about just give me an example of a wow, of a did not know?
just a wow. So I was in...
Just a wow.
Just a wow. That was it. I was down in New London. Some guy had just bought this old, early 20th century structure, and, was like in a little over his head. It was Ocean Avenue, so it's like this gorgeous mansion type thing that has seen much, much, much better days. And, he goes out and he's just showing us this building, and, just from top to bottom, the bones of this structure are gorgeous, but needs a lot of work. And, and then he starts telling us about the history just through the artifacts that he found inside. So that he knew that it was owned by a police officer in New London. But then he finds the police officer's jacket, and he was actually the chief. And then he's learning all about this police chief that used to throw like little balls and galas. And he's going up on the internet, researching it, and he's finding like these amazing photos of what the house used to look like. He's finding old toys from the 1960s, this little silver like laser gun type thing, like toy. And like clearly this was a child's, beloved toy that, it's still there into, 2022. Like it's still in the house. There was also a really weird display of ceramic elephants. Can't explain that, but there was just a bunch of elephants, and some were really nicely placed on the shelf, like they were almost in like a parade. Some were just like put there, like they weren't the favorites. And just like looking at things like that can tell you so much about a person that lived there. That there's, someone that just loved their elephant figurines, and that just like tells you so much about the people that lived here.
And then how does this fit? So something that you might see, would you then maybe give Kathy a call or Cory a call and just say, hey, this is what's going on?
Not so much. What would probably happen is the state has a whole site form process where it's this whole database that we've been building since the 80s. To, as Sarah said, they've got all these points plotted, and I would just fill out a site form, maybe not for a site like this. This is more of a built structure. But I would, if it was something out in the wild, as I was just helped, in Darien, there's a colonial house, the Pondweed House, that my organization had been trying to help the owners in rehabilitating it. It's supposedly the oldest standing structure in Darien still. I'm not sure the full history, but it's this gorgeous salt box that has a very long history, and the owners are interested in renovating it, and they wanted to know about some sites out back. They knew that there had been some old structures there, some cellars, and foundations. So Sarah's office was contacted, I believe was it through Stacy, my fellow circuit rider?
Yeah, so Preservation CT was helping them with the above ground aspects of the structure, right? Because part of this is like when you take on an historic house, right? It's a huge undertaking. It can get very costly. People can get in over their heads really quickly, right? Yep. So that's part of the whole process, is to help people get through that so we can keep these structures standing. But they were aware of some, possible archaeological deposits in the backyard, old structures, things like that, and they wanted to put in a geothermal heating system, which would require excavation. So they contacted my office to come out, and we came out with ground penetrating radar and did a survey and tried to help them figure out, places in the yard where it might be safe to do this without disturbing a lot of archaeological resources, but with the caveat that, of course, it's a very old house, and chances are anywhere you dig in the backyard, you're going to find archaeological deposits, so keep that in mind and maybe contact us when that happens, right. so we can be on top of it. But it is kind of this interplay, of trying to keep things moving between all of us, and trying to keep each other up to date about projects that are happening, so we can work together and fill in the different gaps and try to facilitate the best possible outcome for the resources.
Because there's a situation, because Kathy, you wouldn't get involved. There's no state funding, there's no federal funding, there's nothing. It's exactly. All private sector. It's all so it's almost like you're counting on not a historical conscience, but you know what I'm saying. But people buy these houses for a reason, and you're hopeful that they would want to be able to honor that.
Right, and they desperately usually want to, right? They get into it because they do want to, but then they oftentimes need help with that. And that's why it's so important because, my office has a few regulatory aspects in terms of human burials and some regulatory projects at the town level. But for the most part, where Stefon and I come in are areas where we kind of fall through the regulatory cracks. You know what I mean? So that they're not going to have that state or federal hook.
Right.
But it's people who want to do the right thing and they're interested in the history and the preservation. So that's where OSA and Preservation CT really come into play.
Had a fascinating lunch recently with a distinguished member of the area community in the culture scene, and one of the things that we talked about is how cool it is to see. In fact, there is an event happening in I'm going to get a note shortly. In one of these, I think Farmington or West Hartford or something, where they're doing a house tour of historic homes that have been bought by young people. And the idea is to give you an idea of, the traveling over the transom and through the centuries by understanding what these homes were like. But then the younger owners are sharing the experience of renovation and the weight and magnitude of the investment of time, energy, and resource. Anyway, that's a long way of saying there are a lot of younger people coming in and buying and gravitating to our area. Why not? It's a beautiful place, and our textured past needs to be celebrated. But it does require, with new blood come, new motivations and new priorities, and hopefully you still have that kind of social consciousness.
Yeah, like how do you renovate a house to make it livable and modern enough to, do all the things you need to today with maintaining the fabric and the historic character and things like that.
That event is Haddam and Higginham, by the way, and it's happening soon.
Yeah, so I will say that I think Stefon fills a really great void that Connecticut had for a long time in terms of making a very publicly accessible, and both for the general public and for municipalities who didn't have a place to turn to for helping to manage and understand their archaeological sites. So he's been a great service. I always look at, for the role that Cory and I have, we're very bureaucratic, we're government. It was always, whenever I got a question from the public, I would look at it and I'd be like, great, I can send this over to OSA. But now there's Stefon, but I think it's filling another role that's needed, and there's a lot of archaeology questions that come out there, and I would love to give my time to the public because I really think that's where the advocacy happens. Well, that's where the understanding, where the excitement is, and we just don't have the time to do it.
That's what's great about our situation, too, is we have an awesome situation in Connecticut where we have all these folks working on a state level that can fill the gaps between the various roles, whereas I feel like other areas aren't so lucky. They don't have the resources.
No, and, in a lot of states, the state archaeologist and the SHPO are one and the same. So it's like there is no designated role for public outreach, for education, for research, for collections, that kind of thing in the same way that we have. So we're very fortunate with that. And being able to bring Cory on is just straight up revolutionary. I mean, there's only ever been one staff archaeologist at SHPO since there's, been a staff basically. So, and a lot of that has to do with the big push for infrastructure that's coming in this country, where the volume of development work is just going to explode. Mm-hmm.
Radio. Hey, welcome back to ICRV Radio. If you're just tuning in, we are in the middle of Archaeology of Connecticut with our state archaeologist, Sarah Sportman, and a distinguished panel talking about various roles. It's like you've got a team. You must be grateful for these assets. But as an end user, if I owned a historic home, if I were a developer, I mean, who's my first point? At what point do I know that I need to call somebody, and who is the person that I go to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have all these different groups here, and there's different ways to reach us. And I think that if you're a regular person and you just have an historic or archaeological site or artifact from your property or your yard, I think that Stefon and Preservation Connecticut would be your first stop, because they really do have a program set up where they have people who can come out and, that's facilitating to come right out and talk to you and, see what's up. You can also, people also send me artifacts all the time. Pictures and emails are a great starting point, because I can't always drop everything and come out, but it's great to get the conversation started and see if there's, something to it, if there's a real significant site or artifact that's been found, or if it's just an interesting rock, which also happens on a regular basis. But I think, if you're at the level of a town planner, it's always great to reach out to the Office of State Archaeology, because I often work with municipalities, and developers can probably reach out to the SHPO office, I think would be the best place for that. And you do see sometimes people, trying to preemptively get ahead of the curve and figure out what they need to do in terms of cultural resources before a project starts, which is great, and it means that it's kind of sinking in and taking hold. So
is it, because the question was about exactly how you answered it, of the people that proactively want to reach out to you. How about people who proactively want to reach out to you to turn somebody in because they have a question about something that might be going on? Look, it's not the first time that somebody said, our neighborhood needs to be preserved, and they worry about something going on down the street. I mean, let's face it, you have to get a lot of those calls.
Yes.
We all do, I think. Yeah. And I think part of what we do, and Kathy and Cory and Stefon can speak to this as well, is just try to get a handle on that situation, do a little background research, check with each other if everybody else has a sense of that project or any information about it. Lots of times people just don't realize that the regulatory process is already kind of moving along because it's not super visible. But I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
I don't know if I have so much anything to add. I would say that, we do get those calls with some amount of frequency. And it's a good and it's a bad thing. I want people to care about archaeology because they care about archaeology, not because they want to get somebody in trouble or stop a project. And so that's always a hard thing. But do I appreciate, for me, I consider that good stewardship, and I feel like I've done my job correctly if somebody is looking after a property for somebody else. So, for myself and Cory, I think for the state, we often get phone calls of things happening within state parks. So the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection simply does not have enough staff to police every inch of the property that they own. And occasionally we'll get calls that say, hey, I was in the park, I saw these people, they had a metal detector, I don't think they're supposed to be doing that. And that, our office would be the appropriate place to make that call.
Anything from you guys?
I mean, Preservation Connecticut, we do a lot of stuff with, demo delays specifically. Someone's got a historic structure or something, and oftentimes you'll see an owner trying to get a historic building that's either on the state or national register of historic places, has significance to it. People have gone in and done the history, and then an owner who would rather demolish the building and, to make ready for new development instead of repairing it, restoring it, bringing it back, keeping that history alive. That's what we deal a lot with, and getting connected with local historical societies and the public, and just being like, hey, if you guys care about these buildings, like, there are things that you can help to do. You can sign petitions, you can try to get those developers, those owners to reconsider. There's always money out there. Even with the state of the economy, there's always money out there.
Cool. Hey, it's a funky thing because we re-rack and replay certain programs through the course of a week or a month, and as a way of making sure that people in different day parts with different listening habits get to hear it. So at the risk of being outdated at some point this month, there is an event coming up that we need to talk about. And I got to point out that I am the oldest person around the round table, but what I love about this program and your stewardship is that there's a youthful energy in a field that people do not normally, and I'll use myself as an example, do not normally associate with younger people, which is fascinating, which is awesome, which is what we need. I mean, we worry about next generation farmers in our state. We worry about next generation fifers and drummers in our state. Come on, our state is getting old. So to be at a round table with this youthful vibe is very, very cool. You have an event coming up that I hope might allow that to happen for generations to come that we should talk about?
Yeah, so October is Archaeology Month actually in Connecticut, and kind of the crown jewel of programming for the Archaeology Month is back for the first time since 2019 because it was canceled the last few years due to COVID. We're going to have the Connecticut Archaeology Fair, which is an all-day hands-on event with activities for kids. There's going to be exhibits. There's going to be archaeology presentations from local scholars, and we've all been working together to plan it. And we're all really excited about it. So it would be great to talk a little bit about it and kind of just get the word out there because we're hoping to have a big turnout this year.
Yeah, I think, speaking about the youth and getting people interested, it's a great way for really young kids to see it. But we're also going to end the day with a presentation of 4 field schools that have been happening across the state. And, so those are our young people who have decided this could be a potential career path. And it'll be great to listen to those presentations.
Yeah, because you hit a really important point, Dave, with that discussion about youth and archaeology, because we are almost at a crisis level with a need for archaeologists. And I know a lot of people, it's something that people have always said to all of us, is that I didn't know you could do that for a real job. But you can, and there are job openings everywhere. And a lot of that is being driven by development and infrastructure. And in the next 10 years, it's going to be almost unprecedented how many new young archaeologists we need to meet the regulatory needs and the development needs. So we're really hoping that, we can, through the Archaeology Fair and other events, reach out to young people and get them involved and get them to stay in the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to Sarah's point, people always say to me, I didn't know you could have a career doing this, but I was always interested in it.
Yep.
So the Archaeology Fair is about sparking the interest, but, hopefully people will listen to your show and know there's a career here too.
So for those people that are listening to us in a timely fashion before the event happens, when is it? Where is it? Give us all the details here.
You want to take that because you've been...
Sure. So this Saturday, October 8th, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. over in East Granby at the Old Newgate Prison.
Oh, yeah.
We will be hosting the Archaeology Fair. As I said, everyone is welcome. The museum technically doesn't open till later, but Morgan, the director, has been very kind to allow us to start the event early. Normally, Old Newgate's big pull is its copper mine, where the prisoners were held. At this, starting now in October, the mine is currently hosting an exhibit for jack-o'-lanterns. A bunch of very artistically carved, designed jack-o'-lanterns will be decorating the mines. And while the Archaeology Fair is free for everyone, the mines do require an advance ticket. You can find that information. Where can we find that information?
It's on FOSA's website.
It's on
FOSA's
FOSA.
website.
Yeah, and we'll repost some of that stuff this week. But so basically, if you've never been to Old Newgate Prison, or if you were there during the years when the mines were closed, they're open for tours. They're cool. They're creepy, and they're going to be amazing, I think, filled with all these jack-lanterns this month. So that's another draw, I think, that will be great. But there's also a lot of above-ground programming.
Yes.
So we're going to have cultural resource management firms that'll be there with tables and exhibits to talk about what they do and some of their projects. We're going to have ground-penetrating radar demonstration, archaeology mini-golf. There's going to be colonial games for kids to play. I think there's going to be like a coloring station. There's going to be... Garbology activity, which is when you can go through simulated bags of trash and try to learn about the people who...
Love that.
Which is really what archaeologists do.
It really is. It's just like a modern version of what we do. I think we're also going to have the opportunity for people to try out throwing a dart with an atlatl at a target.
Atlatl.
So that'll be great. I was working on trying to
Is Gary
draw a
Knopf
big.
going to show up?
I don't. I'm working on trying to draw a big mastodon on cardboard today for that activity. And so I think, we've got a lot of things that'll be great for kids, but we also have a lot of really great speakers. I don't know if you want to give us the rundown on the speakers?
Yeah, so we've got a mix of new and old. Everyone's favorite archaeologist Nick Bellantoni will be there. We'll be giving a talk.
Best storyteller in the world.
Yes. So he'll be giving a talk based on his recent book about tombs and mausoleums. Kenny Fader will also be there speaking on Sherlock Holmes and his use of archaeology in his writings. We have two recent graduates. I say recent in like the past, 8 years now it's been. Elizabeth Reed and Stephanie Shallow will be presenting on independent research they've been doing with the Institute for Indian American Studies. No?
Institute for American Indian Studies.
Yeah, okay. Sometimes there's a lot of acronyms when you get into this, and
It's
it's
almost
so
as bad as
confusing.
the military.
At least we're not talking about Kazakhstan.
Yeah, don't. I hope there's no quizzes. I'm bad at quizzes. But yeah, so we'll have them, and then we'll have the field schools. And so it's going to be, I think we've got a really good lineup coming into this. We've got a bunch of different folks with a lot of different perspectives, and everyone will find something worth listening to.
And is this a ticketed event?
No, this is a free event. It's free and open to the public. The only thing you do need to do is if you want to do those mine tours, those are ticketed online ahead of time. But otherwise, I think it's going to be a beautiful fall day if the weather holds. It looks pretty good right now. It should be the perfect day to come out and do this and see these things and learn a little bit more about the archaeology of the state.
Well, I mean, this would have been a cool thing for you guys, if you go back in time a little bit, for you guys to ignite it's a lot cooler way than just watching Indiana Jones the movie. I mean, because this is a hands-on experience, and you never know the impact it's going to have on a youngster, and for that matter, for somebody in a second career. Look, your cohort on this program, Scott Brady came at it at an entirely different angle, so that could happen too. So it's actually something that you hope people, youngsters of all ages, the young and the young at heart, this is something that they can connect with.
Yeah, definitely. And, want to just showcase all the different ways people can be involved in archaeology, not all of which involve breaking your back and your knees on the ground. But, we need everybody to be involved in preservation and to care about these things and to fight for them. And I think the more we can get the information out there, the more likely we are to have a public that's interested and engaged and willing to work with us as partners in this. Has
that been a site that you've been active in, or someone from your office has been active at Old Newgate Prison?
So Old Newgate Prison is actually is under the ownership of our office, the State Historic Preservation Office. And yes, we have sponsored a number of excavations there.
And successful or?
Successful. Sarah Sportman worked on one of the most recent ones. But there is, when we talk about this and our past and preservation and getting kids involved, for me, I even though I didn't get into archaeology for the right reasons as a kid, I understand looking back on my life why I loved it. I hated history class. And I think people are surprised when I work for the State Historic Preservation Office. I couldn't relate to it. It was books. It was memorizing dates and names. There was people who didn't look like me. Just nothing about it was interesting. But when I touch the artifacts, when I feel history, when I experience history, the idea of doing Archaeology Day at Newgate where you look around and you can see history, that's a different experience. And that's what I look forward to when the kids come there, if they're not learners like me, that they can say, history's cool.
Well, it sounds to me, I'm not an educator, but my take on things is there's nothing more powerful than experiential education. I mean, a textbook can only go so far, you know.
Yeah, and that's why sites like Newgate are so important, because you can say we had this prison and we put prisoners down in the mines and that's where they lived, and that's kind of objectively horrifying. But when you're there and you see the mines and you see the buildings and you see the way it's all laid out, and then you can look at some of the archaeology that's been done and you can see the tools that they fashioned themselves, and the food remains that, you know, and to pair that with the documentation of just the disgusting food that they were feeding these people, and you just have all that laid out in front of you. It really kind of, you know, it brings it to life in a way that it wasn't just a prison, right? It's a story. They're people's lives. We know some of the people who live there. We know about them. We know what they suffered. And you can have just a much more kind of visceral and real experience, I think, of that history that people can connect to in a much different way than just a book.
So for all the details, all the information, go to the FOSA website. Is that the right first stop?
FOSA website, it's on your website and the State Historic Preservation website as well, and Preservation CT.
I have to imagine it's on there.
Yeah.
I don't go on it very often.
And our social media pages, you know, we'll be posting it throughout the week, trying to blast that out, get that information out there. But yeah.
Hey, so before we let you go and we get all the details on how people can contact you and you know, find out more and follow and do all that kind of social media stuff, can you just give us an example of we love storytelling. We love how, again, an item that is put in, I call it with the museum, a white glove moment, something that is put in your hand, how you can channel that, how you can go someplace, how you can feel the passion within you kind of take you places because of this item, this artifact. Can you each just give us an example of something that took you places as soon as you touched it, or you saw it, or you brushed it, and you saw, oh my God, it was an OMG moment? Give us, who wants to start?
I can start. I'll go back to Old Newgate. I didn't actually excavate this artifact, but I was going through the collection because I was looking at the animal bones from the excavations, trying to find out more about food and diet at the prison. And one of the things they had the prisoners doing at Old Newgate was making nails. You know, just making nails like every day for 12 hours. And one really cool thing was we found a knife and fork made out of nail rod, like twisted nail rod. And that's like really cool in its own right. But then you read the documentation about the food and what they were doing. Like they were basically just like throwing like pieces of boiled pork on the floor and being like, have at it. So, you know, this is somebody trying to kind of regain their humanity in a little bit by like making utensils so they could eat like a person and not a prisoner. So that, I think, is a pretty wild one, I thought.
Very cool. Cory, you got one?
Sure. Probably more recently, it was maybe a year or two ago, we found the remnants of a wigwam completely intact. And so while it wasn't an artifact per se, it was all the negative impressions of all the little posts that made up the wigwam. And just to get a sense of the size of the house that they were living in, and there's a little pile of calcined bone from the central fireplace where they're cooking their food, it just really brought you back to a time, you know, and gave you a real sense of the type of lives they were living.
And was it bigger than you thought, smaller than you thought?
It's a lot smaller than you'd think.
A lot smaller.
Yeah. So it's about 4 by 6 meters. So it really kind of drives home it was a tiny winter encampment, so it gives you a real sense of the type of
that might make sense to be smaller so that actually you benefit from body warmth, right?
Yeah, maybe. And plus you have the dome kind of shape, which
right.
holds the heat in. It's actually really smart construction for winter.
Exactly, and it really just brings you to that place and time, and much more than even an individual like flake from a stone tool would ever do so, because you feel like you're standing in the structure itself, even though there's nothing left besides the impressions of the poles that held up the structure.
Fascinating. Stefon, you got some?
Yeah, I was in Salem, Connecticut, development project, farmland, started digging and started getting through all this ash and this roofing tile and just what you would assume is modern trash. And it was more modern trash. And someone's driving by and all of a sudden they turn around and come back and they're like, oh, like, what are you guys doing? We explain, you know, we're out there surveying. And he's like, you know, when I was a kid, I grew up here and there used to be a barn here and it probably burned down in like the 70s or 80s. And, you know, we were like, oh, like, that's really cool. Like, thanks, you know, for that kind of information. And then I'm digging through. I just kept going through the trash and I find this burnt motor tiny little, motor for some kind of handheld device, and it says Bethlehem on it, Bethlehem, Connecticut. And I was like, it's just this small, like, historic motor that was made in Connecticut, died in Connecticut, and here I am discovering it still in Connecticut. And it just kind of reminded me the industry of our state, and how we kind of forget about that, that there was all these tools made and used here, and then burnt in a barn because farming's out of the state.
Yeah, fascinating. Take us out, Kathy.
I will bring us back to where we started, but I just want to say, in hearing everybody's story, it reminds me of the other reason why I love archaeology is none of these were stories about great people or great events. They're just about our humanity. This is who we are, and this is what we've left behind, and I think that's always important to me. But I'll bring it back to where I started, which is, for me, the artifact that touched me the most was the first one I ever found, and it was a jade chisel used for facial tattooing.
Circa?
It was a colonial era, so it was probably 1620 or so.
I love this. Let's quickly go around the round table. Quick, with how people can find, follow, and be part of everything. Quick.
Kathy Labadia. I'm at the State Historic Preservation Office. Phone number is 860-500-2329.
I'm Stefon Danczuk over at Preservation Connecticut. You can go to our website, preservationct.com, and find out more info.
Cory?
I'm Cory Atkinson from the State Historic Preservation Office, and you can get me at 860-500-2458.
And you can find the Office of State Archaeology at osa.uconn.edu and on Facebook and our recently renewed Instagram page.
Guys, this was fantastic, but my takeaway is the passion and the fact that I feel so much better about where we are for generations to come because of you guys. So thank you for being part of ICRV Radio.
Thank you.
Thanks.